Hey there. Ready to dive into something that could seriously impact your wallet?
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about the potential 2025 recession, what to expect, how it's different this time around, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it. Our source material today is an interview with economist Dr. Eleanor Vance from the Future Forward podcast. She's got some pretty insightful and maybe even surprising takes on what's brewing in the economic landscape.
Yeah, what's fascinating is how Dr. Vance flips the script on inflation.
Yeah.
She asks, what if the cure for inflation is actually worse than the disease?
Oh, wow.
Right off the bat, that tells you this isn't going to be your typical recession playbook.
That's a great point. And she's not sugarcoating things. A 2025 recession is a real possibility, not just some headline designed to scare us. But what's interesting is that it might not look like recessions of the past.
Right.
She talks about this thing called a labor market mismatch. Unemployment numbers might look decent, but the jobs available and the skills people have just aren't lining up.
Right, it's like trying to fit square pegs into round holes. Think about it this way. There are tons of job openings in tech, but if most unemployed folks have backgrounds in retail or manufacturing, those numbers don't tell the whole story. That mismatch is a big red flag for the economy, even if it's not immediately obvious.
So even if we're seeing help wanted signs everywhere, we shouldn't assume everything's fine and dandy. There are deeper issues at play.
Exactly. Dr. Vance breaks down three main forces that are converging to create what she calls a perfect storm for this potential recession.
Okay.
It's a global slowdown, the lingering effects of the pandemic, and the tricky dance central banks are doing with interest rates.
Let's break those down one by one. Global slowdown, pandemic, hangover. Those are pretty self-explanatory, but what does she mean by this monetary policy tightrope thing? It sounds a little precarious.
Well, it is. To fight inflation, central banks are raising interest rates. The idea is this will cool down borrowing and spending, which in theory brings prices down. But it's like driving a car using only the rear view mirror. You're reacting to what's already happened, not what's right in front of you.
I see.
Overcorrect, and you could slam on the brakes too hard, sending the economy into a tailspin.
So they're trying to thread the needle between taming inflation and not crashing the whole system. What are some specific areas where Dr. Vance sees this potential recession hitting hardest?
One that might surprise you is commercial real estate.
Okay.
Think about all those empty office buildings in cities now that remote work has taken hold.
Yeah.
That's a huge drop in demand, which means property values plummet, and that can ripple out and shake the entire financial system.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would have a domino effect. It's not just about a few empty buildings. It's about the bigger economic picture.
Right. And another area she highlights is the debt time bomb.
Oh.
There's a ton of debt out there. Governments, companies, individuals. As interest rates climb, that debt gets more expensive to pay back, and suddenly you've got a wave of defaults, potentially leading to a full-blown financial crisis. It's a recipe for disaster if things aren't managed carefully.
Okay, so we've got this perfect storm brewing, potentially hitting some unexpected areas. This is starting to sound a little scary, but Dr. Vance doesn't just leave us hanging with all this doom and gloom, right? She talks about what we can do to prepare.
Absolutely. And one thing she emphasizes is that we're not just passive bystanders in this whole thing.
Okay.
Our spending habits actually play a role. When people get nervous about the economy, they tend to tighten their belts and cut back on spending, which can actually make the slowdown worse. It becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
So our collective fear can actually contribute to the problem.
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. If everyone slams on the brakes at the same time, we're all headed for a crash. So if our spending matters that much, what can we do as individuals to prepare, aside from just not panicking? I'm sure that's what everyone's thinking right now.
Yeah. Well, one thing Dr. Vance suggests is looking beyond just cutting back. She actually points out that there's a shift happening in how people are spending. We're becoming more value conscious, focusing less on buying a bunch of stuff and more on experiences.
That's really interesting. So maybe this potential recession could push us towards a more mindful way of consuming, which might actually be a good thing in the long run. But let's get down to brass tacks here. What are some concrete actions we can take to prepare financially? What does Dr. Vance recommend?
She gives some really solid advice, and it's all about taking control, not just hunkering down and hoping for the best. First and foremost, she says, power up your emergency fund. Ideally, you want 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up just in case things go sideways.
Yeah, that emergency fund is like a financial safety net. It can make all the difference. If you unexpectedly lose your job or face a huge medical bill, what else does she recommend?
Next up is tackling that debt. If you've got high-interest debt, like credit cards, make that a priority. Those interest charges can really snowball, especially if rates keep going up.
Debt can definitely feel like you're dragging around a giant weight. Getting that under control is a smart move for sure.
And here's one that I think is really empowering: diversifying your income. Dr. Vance talks about exploring side hustles, freelancing, or learning new skills that could open up different job opportunities.
So it's not just about cutting back, it's about creating more options for yourself. Having multiple income streams is like having a backup generator. If one goes out, you're not left in the dark. Any other practical tips from Dr. Vance?
She's a big advocate for creating a budget. And don't worry, it doesn't have to be a soul-crushing spreadsheet. There are tons of apps out there that make it super easy to track your spending and see where your money's actually going.
Those budgeting apps can be game changers. They take the guesswork out of it and help you make conscious choices about your spending. I've even heard some people say it's actually kind of fun to track their progress and see how much they can save.
It can be. It's all about finding what works for you. And here's a bonus tip from Dr. Vance that I found really insightful. She stresses that investing in your skills and education is a form of economic preparedness.
That makes so much sense. It's not just about weathering this potential recession. It's about positioning yourself for long-term success no matter what the economy throws your way. It's about being adaptable and having a diverse skill set that makes you valuable in any job market.
Exactly. Now, so far we've been focusing on individual actions, but what about the role of the government in all of this? When the economy starts to wobble, we all tend to look to them for some kind of intervention. So what does Dr. Vance say about that?
Yeah, what can they actually do in a situation like this? Are there any tools they can use to try and steer the economy in a better direction?
She talks about two main approaches that governments often use during economic downturns: fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy is basically the government using its spending and taxing powers to influence the economy. Think of it like this. When the economy is sluggish, they can try to stimulate it by increasing government spending on things like infrastructure projects, which creates jobs and puts money back into people's pockets. Or they can cut taxes, giving people more disposable income to spend and boost demand.
So it's kind of like giving the economy a jump start.
Exactly. But as Dr. Vance points out, it's not always that simple. Fiscal policy can be a bit like steering a giant ship. It takes time to implement those changes, and it's not always easy to target spending effectively to make sure it reaches the people and businesses who need it most.
It makes sense that there would be some lag time involved. It's not like flipping a switch. What about monetary policy? What does that entail?
Monetary policy focuses on controlling the money supply and interest rates. It's usually handled by central banks, like the Federal Reserve here in the U.S. During a recession, they might lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper, encouraging businesses to invest and consumers to spend.
Right, because lower interest rates mean it's less expensive to take out a loan for a car, a house, or even to start a business. It's all about making it easier for people to access money and keep the economy flowing.
Exactly. And another tool in their arsenal is something called quantitative easing, which can sound a bit intimidating, but it's basically a way for the central bank to inject money directly into the financial system. You can think of it like giving the economy a financial IV drip to try and boost lending and economic activity.
So it sounds like the government has some pretty powerful options to try and influence the economy. But Dr. Vance also mentions that there are limitations and potential downsides to these interventions, right? It's not just a simple fix.
You got it. For starters, if interest rates are already super low, like they have been in recent years, there's not much room to maneuver. And even if rates are lowered, people and businesses might still be hesitant to borrow if they're worried about the future.
So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It sounds like even with these interventions, there's no guarantee of success.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to government spending, there's always the risk of increasing the national debt, which can have long-term consequences. Plus, if the spending isn't managed carefully, it can actually lead to higher inflation, making things worse for consumers.
So it's a delicate balancing act. They have to weigh the potential benefits against the potential risks. It sounds like there's no magic bullet or easy solution.
That's a key takeaway here. There's no one-size-fits-all fix. And as Dr. Vance reminds us, we also need to consider the impact of technology on all of this.
Oh, right. Technology is constantly changing things up. How does that factor into the potential recession and the recovery?
Well, Dr. Vance points out that technological innovation can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can help to mitigate the impacts of a recession. For example, advancements in artificial intelligence and automation can help businesses become more efficient and reduce costs, which can be crucial when times are tough.
So even though automation sometimes gets a bad rap for potentially replacing jobs, it could actually help businesses stay afloat during a recession and potentially even create new types of jobs.
Exactly. And think about the growth of the digital economy. E-commerce and remote work have opened up all sorts of new opportunities for businesses and individuals to generate income, which can help to offset job losses in more traditional sectors.
That's a great point. It's like the economy is constantly evolving, and those who can adapt and embrace new technologies will be better positioned to not just survive, but thrive. But you mentioned a double-edged sword. What are some of the downsides to technology in this context?
One of the biggest concerns is job displacement. As automation takes over certain tasks, some workers could find themselves out of a job. And if we're not careful, this could exacerbate existing inequalities and lead to social and economic unrest.
Right, so it's about making sure that technological progress benefits everyone, not just a select few. It's about finding ways to support workers who are displaced by automation and help them transition to new roles.
Exactly. And then there's the ethical considerations. For example, using AI in hiring and firing decisions raises concerns about fairness and bias. We need to ensure that technology is used responsibly and doesn't end up perpetuating or amplifying existing societal problems.
So it's about using technology as a tool for good, not just blindly embracing it without considering the potential consequences. It's about finding that balance between innovation and social responsibility.
Absolutely. It's about shaping a future where technology serves humanity rather than the other way around.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the specific actions we can take to the broader economic forces at play. But as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to Dr. Vance's thought-provoking question. How do we build a more resilient economy? What are some of the ideas she puts forward for creating a system that's better equipped to handle these kinds of shocks and disruptions?
Dr. Vance suggests that diversification is key. And she's not just talking about our investment portfolios, but diversifying our economies as a whole.
So, not putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. Instead of relying too heavily on one industry, like manufacturing or finance, we need a broader mix of economic activities.
Exactly. If one sector takes a hit, having a more diverse economy can help cushion the blow. Dr. Vance also emphasizes the importance of investing in what she calls human capital education, training, and skills development.
So basically, a more skilled and adaptable workforce is better equipped to handle economic shifts. That makes a lot of sense. People can pivot and find new opportunities if their industry is struggling.
Right. It's about creating a culture of lifelong learning where people are constantly upgrading their skills and knowledge to stay competitive. Dr. Vance argues that we need to provide people with the resources and support to do that, whether it's through affordable education, training programs, or career counseling.
It's about empowering people to be proactive and take ownership of their economic future. So we've got diversification, investing in human capital. What else does Dr. Vance highlight as being crucial for a more resilient economy?
She talks about the need for stronger social safety nets. Think unemployment insurance, health care, affordable housing. These things can provide a cushion for people during tough times and help prevent widespread economic hardship.
That's so important. Those safety nets can make all the difference in helping people get back on their feet after a job loss or unexpected medical bills. It's about creating a system that supports people, not just corporations.
Exactly. And Dr. Vance also brings up the concept of sustainability. Building a resilient economy means thinking about the long-term environmental and social impacts of our choices.
So it's about recognizing that economic health is intertwined with social and environmental health. It's a much more holistic approach.
Precisely. It's about creating an economy that's not just productive, but also just an equitable one that's built to last for generations to come.
I'm really struck by how Dr. Vance's perspective goes beyond just surviving a recession. She's challenging us to rethink the very foundations of our economic system and build something more sustainable and resilient. It's a huge task, but it's inspiring to think about the possibilities.
Absolutely. There's no easy fix. It's a complex challenge that requires us to be innovative, collaborative, and forward-thinking.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a mix of informed and inspired. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about, both in terms of my personal preparedness and the bigger picture of what kind of economic future we're building.
Me too. And that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. We're not just skimming the surface. We're really digging into the complexities and exploring different perspectives. And hopefully that empowers us to make more informed decisions, both in our own lives and as a society.
Absolutely. It's about taking action, whether it's building up our emergency funds, diversifying our income streams, supporting policies that promote economic resilience, or just having these conversations with our friends, family, and communities.
Couldn't agree more. It's about taking ownership of our economic future and working together to create a system that's truly built to last.
That's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. We hope you found it informative and inspiring.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and remember, we're all in this together.